Good morning, guys. So I'm going to read sections 3 and 4 for you. That just gives an option instead of having to read it yourself. You can listen to me and follow along. The Constitutional Convention is called. This is section 3. The Founding Fathers had a difficult task ahead of them when they decided they needed to fix the Articles of Confederation. Many realized that if they did not strengthen the government's power, everything they fought so hard to save in the American Revolution would be lost. The Founding Fathers or framers returned to the drawing board during the Constitutional Convention to create the government that continues to govern the nation today. Those that worked on creating the Constitution of the United States were called framers because their main task was to build the framework for the country. For generations that would follow. The Constitution is unique and has been working for the country's citizens for over 200 years. The original document is located in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It is a living document because the country can make changes to the original document to fit the times and needs of the country and its citizens. Amazingly enough, the Constitution has only been changed 27 times. These are called amendments. The Founding Fathers were more on the mark with creating a lasting government than anyone could have ever predicted. The Constitutional Convention took place in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia was chosen to hold the convention. The plan was that those working on drafting a more effective government document would do so without any public intervention. The convention ran from May to September of 1787. Delegates arrived by horseback or carriage on rough roads. 12 states sent delegates or representatives to the convention. Rhode Island was the only state choosing not to have any representation. A total of 55 delegates were pulled together in one room to create a lasting form of government. Some of the delegates who made substantial contributions to the document were James Madison, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were both absent at the convention because they were serving overseas during this time. It is amazing that the delegates ranged in age from 26 to 81. No women, slaves, indigenous people, or minorities were invited to be part of the convention. Only the well-bred, well-fed, well-read, well-led, and well-wed, James McGregor Burns, historian, The Crosswinds of Freedom, said. So much is known about the convention because of James Madison. Madison was famous for detailed notes he took during the convention. Not only did he leave a record of the convention, he shared his knowledge of the government with the other members of the convention. Madison had studied other governments, and his influence at the convention was the first of many ways that Madison helped develop the country. He would also contribute greatly to the drafting of the Bill of Rights, as well as some of the Federalist Papers and the Virginia Plan with regard to representation in Congress and the federal level. Section 4, Compromises at the Convention. The first order of business was to elect a president for the convention. George Washington was selected. It was hot, humid summer to be kept indoors, but secrecy was a must. Most of the Founding Fathers wore wigs, long socks, and jackets over their shirts. Can you imagine how they felt with no air conditioning? How about that smell? The Founding Fathers took secrecy for a whole new level by keeping the windows and curtains shut. That nothing spoken in the House be printed or otherwise published or communicated without leave. That was left from Madison's notes. The Founding Fathers knew that if the public found out that a brand new government was being formed, there would be a rebellion. A good portion of work time at the Constitutional Convention involved proposal, debate, and finally agreement upon a number of compromises, as many of the framers had specific ideas about which policies and procedures could benefit government at a national level. Issues at the convention. Representation. This is what you're going to do your Venn diagram on. One of the first plans suggested at the convention was the Virginia Plan, written by none other than James Madison. The proposed plan set up a strong central government with 3 branches, legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative branch would be broken into 2 houses, and a number of representatives in each state would be based on the state's population. The greater the population, the more vote a state would have, and the larger states at this time, like Virginia, favored this plan, particularly because they had not held this advantage under the Articles of Confederation. The smaller states were not happy with the Virginia Plan and came back with their own proposal, the New Jersey Plan, created by William Patterson. This plan called for an open house legislature. Representation would be equal for each state, so no one state could become too powerful. This was similar to the structure created by Articles of Confederation. This plan, like the Virginia Plan, also called for 3 branches of government, as most framers agreed that the separation of powers for the new government was essential. Neither group was happy about the other plan, but knew they needed to compromise to keep the convention moving. The Great Compromise, otherwise known as the Connecticut Compromise, was put together by Roger Sherman and Oliver Ellsworth and passed by only one vote. According to this plan, the House of Representatives would be based on population from the Virginia plan, and the Senate would be equal representation based on the New Jersey plan. Both sides were satisfied to have part of what they wanted in a new plan, right? So this is where you're getting your info from your Venn diagram. Everything you need can be found on this page and this little paragraph here. If you want to watch these videos, you can, or these interactives, that's fine. But that's where you're going to get your info. Slavery. This is our kick the can issue, right, from last week. As the convention continued, the debate over slavery raised many more questions and arguments that the issue As the convention continued, the debate over slavery raised even more questions and arguments on the issue of representation. There were two different viewpoints about how slaves should be counted to representation and taxes. The South wanted slaves to count towards representation, but did not want to give them any rights or to be taxed on them. The North felt that the South could not have it both ways. If slaves were to be counted as part of the population, rights should be granted. If they were not to be counted and instead viewed as property, rights would not have to be granted. As far as the majority of the people in the North were concerned, slaves should be taxed as property because they had not been granted rights such as those of free white men. The idea of counting slaves as 3/5 of a person has roots back to the Articles of Confederation. James Madison proposed this idea. The founding father compromised to count 3/5 of the state's slavery population. Population was used for representation, electoral votes, and the amount of taxes that each state would pay. So your question might become, how do you figure out 3/5 of a person? So you're not taking and saying, okay, I'm going to cut, 2/5 of their body off, and that doesn't count. They're going to take a total number, and then they're going to times that number by 3/5, and they're going to take that number. So they're not counting their whole entire slave population. Only a fraction of that population will count towards representation, population, and taxes because, they're considered property, not people. All right, so that's a big thing. This is your kick the can issue. How do you figure out a slavery issue like this one? You create a compromise and you decide that, okay, we're not going to give slaves rights because we're only going to count them as 3/5 of a person. So they're not considered a whole person, so they don't have to have rights. And that makes both sides happy enough. They can agree, and we can move on with the Constitutional Convention. Foreign slave trade. The Founding Fathers were very careful about both the words they used in the Constitution as well as the words they did not. For example, the word slave does not appear in any part of the original Constitution. Some historians argue that the omission of the word slave was because almost half of the Founding Fathers were slave owners, even though many of the members of the convention had more moral issues against slavery. As the Constitutional Convention continued to take place, and it became clear to its participants that if compromises were not made on the issue of slavery, the South would threaten not to sign the Constitution once the document had been completed. Madison identified the source of much of the strife when he said, "It seems now to be pretty well understood that the real difference of interest lies not between the large and the small, but between the northern and the southern states. The institution of slavery and its consequence from the line of discrimination. The compromise came between the southern states and the northern states. If northern states would allow the Atlantic slave trade to continue for 20 more years, ending in 1808, then the southern states would stop adding shipping laws that hurt the North. Part of the compromise reached included agreement by framers from the southern states that shipping laws intent on punishing the North would cease." Because if you remember from that clickable map video, the North has all the shipping. Around the same time, fugitive slave laws were the source of great disagreement as well. Under the fugitive slave laws, people were required to return a runaway slave to their owner. Many people wonder why slavery wasn't ended during this time of compromise and creation. They pondered how the framers could build a nation on a statement like, "All men are created equal." Pushing aside the issue of slavery was a difficult choice for the Founding Fathers, but they hoped that one day the country would be stronger and more ready to deal with this tough issue. All right, so Last one, presidential elections. Electing the president was a big deal for the Founding Fathers. They were hesitant to make the president too powerful like King George III had been. On the other hand, the president also had to have some power. Many believed a president should be the head of the country and should not be chosen by the members of Congress, state legislators, or voted on by the people. The system that was decided upon is what became known as the Electoral College, which is what we still do today. It's not foolproof, but it functions. The Electoral College can be a difficult concept for citizens to understand, mostly because the process of electing the president is an indirect process. Each state has many electors as many electors as the number of representatives and senators in Congress. The District of Columbia also has 3 votes. Many states have an all-or-nothing system where the candidate that wins the most popular votes receives all the state's electoral votes. Maine and Nebraska are 2 exceptions. The electoral votes are split based on popular votes received by the candidate. Today, there are 538 total votes. In order to become president, a candidate must receive 270 electoral votes. The electors for each state are decided upon by the state. The meeting for electors to vote for the president is the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. If a candidate does not get the required 270 votes, representatives in the House then vote among the top 3 candidates for president. This has happened once in the nation's history. In the election of 1824, no presidential candidate received a majority of the necessary 131 electoral votes. The U.S. House of Representatives voted to elect John Quincy Adams as the 6th president of the United States. Now, this year, we're going to talk more about this tomorrow, but this is super important because we are electing a president again this year. We will either re-elect President Donald Trump or we will elect possibly former Vice President Joe Biden. So one of them will become the next president, the 46th president of the United States. So pay attention to this when we get talking about this again tomorrow. Have a great day, boy. Oh my God, I almost said boys. Have a great day.